Hello, this is All 24 News World News Program coming to you live from Algiers with me, Karim Zachary. Coming up next. In light of the occupation, brutal actions and crimes, Palestinian groups have declared Friday as the Day of Anger. Also coming up, the United Nations has called for an immediate end to all military activity around Europe's largest nuclear power plant in southeastern Ukraine. Justice Department is asking a federal court to unseal the warrant that the FBI used to search the Mar-a-Lago estate of Donald Trump. And finally, in our headlines, Ethiopia has completed the third filling of its mega dam reservoir on the Blue Nile. Hello again, those were today's top stories. First in our news, on Friday, the occupied Palestinian territories witnessed a day of public outrage, condemning the Zionist aggression against Palestinians and rejecting the assassinations and arrests carried out by the occupying army against the Palestinian people. The coordinator of Palestinian forces and factions, Wassal Abu Yusuf, said that the purpose of organizing the Day of Palestinian Anger was to reaffirm the unity of the Palestinian class in the face of occupation. In our topical news today, Attorney General Merrick Garland announced on Thursday that the Justice Department is asking a federal court to unseal the warrant that the FBI used to search the Mar-a-Lago estate of former President Donald Trump, acknowledging the extraordinary level of public interest in the case involving classified records. The request is notable because such records typically remain sealed while an investigation is ongoing.
This response today that we saw from the Attorney General did not provide us with additional details about the search itself or the investigation into the records. What we do know is that the search earlier this week of Mar-a-Lago was related to whether the president had taken presidential records that should have been turned over to the National Archives and possibly classified information, which would be a federal crime.
In the United States, still an armed man clad in body armor who tried to breach the FBI's Cincinnati office on Thursday was shot and killed by police after he fled the scene and engaged in an hours-long standoff in a rural part of the state. The suspect was identified as Ricky Schiffer. Federal investigators are examining whether Schiffer may have had ties to far-right extremist groups who made the Capitol attack. The United Nations has called for an immediate end to all military activity around Europe's largest nuclear power plant in southeastern Ukraine, warning that any damage could lead to catastrophic consequences in the region and beyond. Nabil Khazini reports.
A serious hour, this is how the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency described the situation in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant before the UN Security Council, demanding access to the nuclear facility.
Based on the most recent information, IAEA experts have preliminary assessed that there is no immediate threat to nuclear safety as a result of the shelling or other military actions. However, this could change at any moment.
This week, Russian officials say they would allow inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency to see the facility after the UN nuclear watchdog said the situation at the plant was completely out of control and in need of inspection and urgent repairs. The two warring sides accuse each other of the new bombings at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is the largest in Europe. Moscow blames Ukraine for the shelling and urges Kiev's supporters to stop attacks and prevent a disastrous radiation leak.
Mr. President, what has happened in recent days at the plant is the result of Kyiv regime's criminal actions against the nuclear infrastructure and the personnel serving these facilities. and has been going on for months without any international reaction.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, meanwhile, pointed the finger at Russia, which he said was putting all of Europe in danger. The situation at Zaporizhzhia led top Ukrainian officials, including the president, to fear a possible Chernobyl-like meltdown. Conditions have deteriorated in recent months, and most of the Ukrainian workers at the power plant have left the facility.
З наближених населених пунктів, які знаходяться в найближчому.
This means for us that as of today, we have to prepare for any scenarios. As of today, the state emergency services, together with the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Ministry of Regions, discusses different scenarios that are necessary, including the question of evacuations.
Продовження дії росіян там.
The Zaporizhzhia plant has been subjected to a series of attacks over the past few weeks, raising questions over whether the world is on the verge of a nuclear accident.
Moving on now, satellite images showed heavy damage and destroyed aircraft at Russian military airfield in Crimea after several blasts at the site. Moscow has denied aircraft were damaged and said the explosions were accidental, while Kiev has not publicly claimed responsibility. According to Danish Defense Minister Morten Motzgov, Western nations committed more than 1.5 billion euros on Thursday in the form of cash, equipment, and training to strengthen Ukraine's military prowess in its conflict with Russia. The money, which was pledged by a group of 26 nations at a conference in Copenhagen, will be used to train Ukrainian soldiers, demine war-torn areas in Ukraine, increase weapon production for Ukraine, and supply existing weapons, missiles, and ammunition.
Today, 26 countries, as well as the European Union, have met here in Copenhagen and have sent a clear signal. Ukraine's fight is our fight. We stand together and we stand with Ukraine. We condemn Russia's brutal attack in the strongest possible way, and we will continue to assist Ukraine in its military needs.
Still with the Russia-Ukraine file, Latvia's parliament on Thursday designated Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism over the war in Ukraine and called on Western allies to impose more comprehensive sanctions on Moscow in order to bring an end to the conflict. Latvia recognizes Russia's actions in Ukraine as targeted genocide against the Ukrainian people. To Algeria now, the Algerian Prime Minister, Mr. Ayman bin Abdurrahman, said Thursday that the Algerian government aims to cover 80% of the national needs in terms of agricultural production in 2023. The Prime Minister stressed the need for all stakeholders in this field to step up their efforts to reach this goal by next year. This was on the sidelines of the inauguration ceremony of the National Seed Bank. Kenyans crowded on or round radios and televisions on Thursday, increasingly anxious for news of who their next president might be. The race to the top position has seen the domination of William Samoei Ruto with 52.6% of voters, followed by Raila Amolo Odinga with 46.8%. Well, the results are yet to come in the next few hours.
To me, if Baba takes over, it will make this country prosperous. Internationaries, we will be admitted internationaries. Yes. So for me, I'm supporting Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga. Yes, and I voted for him. This is the slogan, Azimio, inawezekana. Because we want a united country. We don't want ile nchi ambayo imekuwa na mtafaruku. We need a united country.
EU states sent firefighters to help France extinguish a huge fire on its Atlantic coast. French officials warned that a massive wildfire could further spread in the country's parched southwest. Miriam Zian has the story.
6 European countries started to arrive in France to help battle a spate of wildfires. 65 German firefighters have arrived from Bonn to fight a blaze south of Bordeaux that has reignited after being brought under control 2 weeks ago.
We understand the situation that you have here, and it must be really tough to have fires in that duration and that large areas, that it's very hard to fight them. So For us, as the French authorities requested assistance through the European Union Civil Protection Mechanism, for us it was no question that we directly offer our assistance.
The wildfire in France's Gironde region has been raging for 2 days near the small town of Landiras. About 7,400 hectares of forest have already been destroyed in the wildfire in southwestern France, as more than 1,000 emergency workers are battling it. But despite all the efforts, the blaze was still out of control on Thursday. Overnight, the darkened skies had glowed orange above the burning forests, leaving local residents to face another anxiety-racked night. The Interior Minister has said that fires could continue to flare up for a further 6 weeks. And several large forest fires have also hit France's northern regions this summer, as the country experiences a particularly bad fire season.
We must continue more than ever to fight against climate change, and we must also continue within the framework of the ecological planning for which I am responsible, with the support of the Minister for Ecological Transition to adapt to this climate change.
Fires are currently also raging in Spain and Portugal. Climate scientists say fires and droughts such as the current one affecting France will become more common as the Earth warms because of the greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere by industry and other human activities.
Dozens of protesters took to the streets of the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, demonstrating against the military ruling in the country, which has been in a critical stage for a considerable period of time. Protesters carried banners and chanted slogans against the ruling, which they say has not brought any changes. Security forces fired tear gas at protesters, as many of them were reported injured.
We need Sudan to be the way we want it. We have been under military rule for more than 57 years now, and we've never seen any change. We have only seen destruction and a collapsed economy. We're one of the richest countries. Why is our economy in this state?
To Latin America now, thousands of Brazilians took to the streets over the last declarations of the country's recently elected president Jair Bolsonaro. Demonstrators considered the declarations as a threat to the country's democracy.
Brazilian youth took to the streets of Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo to show their refusal of their president's last declarations and demand fair elections, as well as denouncing recent education funding cuts.
I hope that there is at least a politicized debate during the electoral period. I don't feel overly optimistic, but I hope that we can have a debate for the reconstruction of the country, of the nation.
Dozens of demonstrators raised their concerns over President Jair Bolsonaro, who recently rejected the electoral results. Bolsonaro, who is a far-right politician and former army captain, has questioned Brazil's electronic voting system and attacked Supreme Court justices who oversee elections, claiming that they favor his leftist rival, former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. However, he did not bring any evidence to the table.
This is a great moment, I would say even unique, where the capital government office holders and workers join efforts to defend democracy.
Bolsonaro has repeatedly claimed that the electronic voting machines are prone to fraud, though he never presented evidences. At one point, he threatened that the elections would be suspended if Congress didn't approve a bill to introduce printed receipts of votes. However, the bill didn't pass.
Brazil has overcome the military dictatorship. The National Assembly Constituent rescued the legitimacy of our institutions, re-establishing the democratic state.
The country's president began expressing desire of greater involvement of army forces in election oversight, as army officials visited the electoral authorities' headquarters to inspect voting machine source code. Bolsonaro has alleged that some of the authorities' top officials are working against him.
South Korea's president pardoned Samsung Electronics vice chairman on Friday with a year left on his sentence for bribing former President Park Geun-hye as part of the massive corruption scandal that toppled Park's government. The pardon of Lee, 1 year after he was released on parole, underscores Samsung's huge influence over his country that relies on its technology exports. In June, when public holidays were anticipated to have a significant negative impact on the economy, Britain's economy contracted by less than anticipated. but the industries most vulnerable to the rising cost of living, such as retail and restaurants, still had difficulty. However, overall output for the second quarter continued to decline as it was anticipated that Britain would experience a protracted downturn at the end of the year due to soaring inflation and rising interest rates. Human Rights Watch on Thursday in its latest report accused Cameroonian troops in the northwest regions of killing at least 10 people in a crackdown against Anglophone separatists. The report shows a string of allegations by rights monitors in the battle between security forces and English-speaking militants seeking cessation in Francophone majority Cameroon. China has condemned an official Lithuanian delegation's visit to Taiwan, saying it violates commitments to the One China principle. Beijing warned that it will take resolute countermeasures following the visit. Lithuania, meanwhile, promised not to establish official relations nor have official contact with Taiwan. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres arrived in South Korea on Thursday for a two-day stay visit, which followed visits to Japan and Mongolia as part of a trip to Asia. The UN chief discussed regional issues with South Korea President Yoon Suk-yeol. Both shared views on North Korea's nuclear and missile program. Antonio Guterres expressed support for the denuclearization of North Korea.
Launch a process of dialogue aiming at the denuclearization. It will be very much welcome and will have the full support of the United Nations.
Yes. A prominent Taliban cleric was killed in an attack in a seminary in Kabul when the attacker detonated explosives hidden in plastic artificial leg on Thursday. It was not immediately clear who was behind the blast. Taliban sources said the attacker was someone who had previously lost his leg and had hidden the explosive in a plastic artificial one. The Taliban has broken its own promises to women, many of whom have been forced to leave their working lives behind. Their careers have been ruined, their educations rendered worthless. Many now struggle to survive and put food on the table. Zahra Farjani with more.
The Taliban have broken multiple pledges of respecting human and women's rights since taking over Afghanistan a year ago. In March, the Taliban backtracked on their announcement to open girls' high schools, saying they would remain closed until further ado. Karisma Rashidi was a proud high school student before the Taliban deprived her from her basic right. Although she was prohibited from school, she refused to give up. Now she attends classes at a private education center for girls, hoping that one day she pursues her dream of becoming a journalist.
I want to become a successful journalist in the future. I would love to serve my country, and education is my basic human right.
Taliban undermining women's rights did not end with curbs on education. It also expanded to their clothes and movements. Monessa Mubarez, fighting for her rights in Afghanistan, used to work for the finance ministry and lost her job when the militant regime seized power. Ever since, Mubarez has devoted herself to activism, having organized 17 street protests so far.
We will raise our voices against every injustice until our last breath. We will stand against all the tyranny imposed by the Taliban on the people of Afghanistan, especially on the women of Afghanistan.
Going over her past life, Gulistan Safari is looking at work certificates of her time as a police officer in Kabul.
My job was so valuable for me. I loved my job. We were so happy. But when the Taliban came, they did not allow us to go to work.
Despite losing her husband to cancer 2 years ago, Safari was a happy mother and grandparent. Now, she cleans houses to provide for a household of 5.
I usually work from 8 a.m. till 4 p.m. It's a really boring job, but I have no other choices, no other income. We die if I don't work.
The absence of women in workspaces in Afghanistan not only affects their household, but also it makes an entire economy dysfunctional. With Afghanistan economic crisis, billions of dollars in aid and reserves have been cut off, and ordinary people have little money for their necessities, and many families are struggling to make ends meet.
Iraq's government has agreed to continue supplying Lebanon's electricity company with heavy fuel oil for another year. Lebanon's caretaker prime minister said on Thursday alleviating pressure on Lebanon's struggling power grid. Najib Mikati said he had made the request to Iraq's prime minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi, who agreed to extend the same terms of the agreement signed last year. Ethiopia has completed the third filling of its mega dam reservoir on the Blue Nile, a development that could raise further tensions with downstream neighbors Egypt and Sudan. The announcement comes a day after Ethiopia said it had launched electricity production from the second turbine at the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which lies in the west of the country. And for more international news, let's follow this report by Sofian Kanturi.
According to the UNHCR, the National Refugee Council, the number of Somalians experiencing crisis hunger is anticipated to rise from about 5 million to more than 7 million in the upcoming months. This situation will be made worse by the effects of climate change and rising food prices as a result of the conflict in Ukraine, while a drought forced more than 1 million people to relocate.
Officials from Poland and Germany said the mass die-off of fish in Oder River, which flows through both countries, appears to be caused by an unidentified highly toxic substance.
The Earth has warmed by about 1.1 degrees Celsius since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Some areas have warmed up much more quickly than others, so the warming has not been consistent. The Arctic is one such area. According to a recent study, during the past 43 years, the Arctic has warmed up almost 4 times faster than the rest of the world. This indicates that the Arctic has warmed by 3 degrees Celsius on average since 1980.
With no let-up in scorching temperatures likely before the weekend in France, firefighters backed by water-bombing aircraft battled on many fronts, saying the massive fire could change direction at any moment. While in Germany, the country's main commercial route, the Rhine, has had its water level drained this summer by weeks of sweltering heat and little rain, which has slowed shipping and increased freight costs by more than 5 times.
The French cartoonist JeanJacques Cousteau, best known for the much-loved Little Nicholas series of children's books and works by Marcel Pagnol, has died Thursday, aged 89, according to French news agency. And finally in our news, FIFA World Cup 2022 brought forward 1 day for Qatar to kick off tournament against Ecuador in November. The Qatar 2022 World Cup was scheduled to open with the Netherlands playing against Senegal, but was changed by the event organizers so that the opening ceremony and Qatar versus Ecuador takes place on November 20th. Well, that's all we have for now. Let's have a reminder of our top stories. In light of the occupation, brutal actions and crimes, Palestinian groups have declared Friday as the Day of Anger. The United Nations has called for an immediate end to all military activity around Europe's largest nuclear power plant in southeastern Ukraine. You also followed in our news, Justice Department is asking a federal court to unseal the warrant that the FBI used to search the Mar-a-Lago estate of Donald Trump. And finally, as you watched, Ethiopia has completed the third filling of its mega dam reservoir on the Blue Nile. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, we reach the end of our program. For more updates, follow us on our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even YouTube. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.